The hall was enormous. It was built from white stone that glowed faintly under the light of 3 suns. Hundreds of alien delegates sat in curved rows that rose from the floor to the ceiling, each row a little higher than the one below it. Banners hung from every pillar. Every banner showed the symbol of a different world. There were 47 of them, one for each member species of the Galactic Sovereignty Council. At the far end of the hall, near a small door that almost nobody noticed, sat a single human. Her name was Sarah Voss. She was 53 years old. She had short gray hair and dark eyes that never seemed to blink. She wore a plain navy blue uniform with no medals, no badges, and no decorations of any kind. She carried a small notepad and a pen. She had been sitting in that same chair for 11 years. The Centennial Summit happened once every 100 years. Every species in the galaxy sent their best ships, their best soldiers, and their most powerful leaders. The Cathari alone had brought 60 warships. Their fleet sat in orbit above the Council planet like a wall of iron teeth. Other species had brought their fleets too. The planet's sky was full of ships. Earth had sent one ship, a single diplomatic cruiser called the Patience. It had no weapons and no escorts. It arrived quietly, parked itself at the edge of the designated zone, and went silent. Nobody talked about the human ship. It was too small to be interesting. Inside the hall, the opening ceremony began. The Grand Speaker of the GSC, a tall creature with 4 arms and skin the color of dark wood, called the session to order. Species after species rose to deliver greetings. Their speeches were long and proud. They spoke of ancient histories, of great wars won, of alliances that had shaped the galaxy. The Cathari delegate spoke the longest. His name was Vasquez. He was nearly 3 meters tall, covered in dark green scales, and he wore a robe made from the skin of a creature that no longer existed because his people had hunted it to extinction. Vasquez was known throughout the galaxy as a speaker without fear. He said what he wanted, and nobody stopped him, because the Cathari fleet was always close by. He looked around the hall as he spoke. His golden eyes moved from species to species. They paused for just a moment when they found Sarah Voss sitting at her small table near the back. A slow smile spread across his face. It was not a kind smile. "And of course," Vasquez said, his voice carrying easily through the hall, "we are honored once again by the presence of our quiet friends from the 3rd planet of the Sol system." He let the word quiet hang in the air for a moment. Several delegates laughed. Others covered their mouths politely. 80 years, he continued. 80 years humanity has sat at the end of our table. They have attended every session. They have paid every fee. They have filed every form. He paused again. And in 80 years, they have said almost nothing at all. They are, without question, the galaxy's most well-behaved pets. The laughter this time was louder. It came from at least 30 different sections of the hall. Some species laughed with their mouths, some with sounds that came from their chests or their throats. The sound filled the great white hall and bounced off the glowing stone walls. Sarah Voss did not move. She did not look up from her notepad. She was writing something, slowly and carefully. If the laughter bothered her, no part of her face showed it. The session continued. Hours passed. Votes were cast on small matters. Trade agreements were reviewed. Border disputes were settled. The human delegate was not involved in any of it. She sat, and she listened, and she wrote. When the first session ended, and the delegates moved toward the exits, a young alien came to stand near Sarah Voss. He was from the Myriad Collective, a species of pale, thin beings with large dark eyes and quiet voices. He was new to his position, and still young enough to feel ashamed when other people were laughed at. "Ambassador Voss," he said carefully, "I want you to know that not everyone in the hall found that funny." She looked up at him. Her expression was calm and open, like someone who had heard much worse and had not been damaged by it. "I know," she said. Quell hesitated. He had expected her to be upset, or at least tired. He looked at her again, more carefully this time. She did not look defeated. She did not look sad. She looked, he realized slowly, like someone who was waiting. Not the way a servant waits. The way a door waits to be opened. "Does it not bother you?" he asked. 80 years of being ignored. 80 years of being treated like you do not matter. Why does humanity never push back? Sarah Voss clicked her pen closed and set it on the table. She looked at Quell with those calm, dark eyes for a long moment before she answered. "We are still deciding whether you are worth the trouble." Quell opened his mouth and then closed it again. He nodded slowly and walked away. He was not sure why, but as he walked, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. Sarah Voss picked up her pen again and kept writing. That night, from the communications array of the patients, a single encrypted signal was sent across the long dark between stars. It traveled faster than light, bouncing through relay points, passing through the outer edges of known space, and finally arriving at a facility buried deep under the driest desert on Earth. The facility had no name on any public map. It had been built 40 years ago, and almost nobody knew it existed. Inside the facility, a computer received the signal, decoded it in less than a second, and logged a single word into a file that had been waiting, quietly and patiently, for a very long time. The word was noted. The file had a name. It was called the Response Protocol. It had been created the same year humanity received their observer status, by a quiet group of men and women who had looked at the GSC carefully, smiled politely, shaken hands with their new galactic neighbors, and then gone home to start building. Nobody at the Centennial Summit knew the file existed. Nobody in the Great White Hall had any idea what was waiting inside it. Nobody, except Sarah Voss, who was already walking back to her small plain room through corridors full of alien laughter that did not reach her anymore. The inner chamber of the Galactic Sovereignty Council was not open to the public. It had no banners and no ceremony. It was a plain gray room with a round table and chairs that had been worn smooth by thousands of years of use. The beings who met there were not politicians. They were the people who actually ran things. Oav of the Myriad Collective had been asking for this meeting for 6 years. He had sent reports, he had filed requests, he had been politely delayed, redirected, and ignored. When he finally walked through the door and saw the 4 senior council members sitting at the round table, he did not feel relieved. He felt afraid. Not for himself. For them. Oav was a small being, even by Myriad standards. He had large dark eyes and pale skin, and long thin fingers that he could not stop folding and unfolding when he was nervous. He was very nervous now. He set his data case on the table, opened it, and placed a single flat display screen in the center. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. "I will try to be brief." The Ketharai representative, a senior official named Dreth, who had never personally spoken to a human, leaned back in his chair and crossed his thick arms. "You have 20 minutes, he said. "Your previous reports have been reviewed and found to be alarmist." "Yes," said Oav, "I know. I am hoping that today you will understand why I was alarmed." He turned on the display screen. It showed the Sol system, Earth, a blue and white planet in the 3rd orbit. Then the screen zoomed out, and out, and out. The council members leaned forward slightly. "For 80 years, Oav began, we have classified humanity as a pre-contact civilization that was granted observer status out of diplomatic courtesy. We have assumed they were developing slowly. We were wrong." He pointed to Jupiter. Around it, in close orbit, were structures, large structures, structures that had not been there 40 years ago. "These are shipyards," he said. "Each one is approximately 120 kilometers long. There are 9 of them around Jupiter alone. There are 7 more around Saturn." Dreth uncrossed his arms. "That is not possible. We would have detected." "They are shielded," Oav said quietly. "They use a type of energy masking that we do not fully understand yet. We only found them because one of our deep-range probes suffered a sensor malfunction, and by accident, briefly ran on a frequency we normally do not use. The room was very quiet. The asteroid belt, OAV continued, has been almost completely stripped of usable metals. Saturn's rings have lost nearly 30% of their mass over the past 40 years. The material had to go somewhere. It went into the shipyards. He paused. We believe the current human fleet, the one they have not shown us, numbers somewhere between 150 and 300 warships. The margin of error is large because we cannot see all of the yards. Nobody at the table spoke. OAV kept going. Human biology, he said, moving to the next section of his report. We have always classified humans as a soft species. Medium strength, medium endurance, no exceptional physical traits. He brought up a new set of data. This is incorrect. Humans heal at a rate that is 3 to 5 times faster than most GSC species. They can function in conditions of extreme sleep deprivation, severe hunger, and psychological stress that would hospitalize or kill most other beings. Their pain tolerance is very high. Their soldiers train in environments that we would consider cruel. More importantly, he said, they do not break easily. There is something in human psychology that responds to threat by becoming more focused rather than less. They call it being pushed into a corner. When humans are pushed into a corner, they do not look for a way out. They look for a way through. Dreth's golden eyes were fixed on the screen. You said they're military, he said slowly. How many? They do not have one military, OAV said. They have 17. Each one answers to a different human government or faction. They have spent centuries arguing with each other, fighting each other, and competing with each other. This looks like weakness from the outside. He looked at Dreth directly. It is not. When faced with an external threat, every one of those 17 military structures answers to a single emergency council. Every time, without fail. We have historical records going back 400 years that confirm this pattern. He turned off the display. The room was still. There is one more thing, OAV said. The silence. 80 years of almost no communication from Earth. We have assumed this was because they had nothing to say, that they were learning, adjusting, trying to fit in. He folded his fingertips together. I do not believe that is true. I believe the silence was a study. I believe that for 80 years, humanity has been watching us, mapping our fleet positions, cataloging our political weaknesses, learning our supply lines. Every session they attended, every document they received, every piece of open galactic data they were given access to, all of it went somewhere. He closed his data case. They have been learning how to fight us, he said, and I think they are almost ready. There was a very long pause. Then Dreth said, this is speculation. You have some unusual sensor readings and a theory. OAV looked at him. Yes, he said. I also have 30 years of watching humanity, and a feeling in my chest that has never been wrong. He picked up his case. I am resigning my post effective tomorrow. I do not want to be inside this building when you find out I was right. He left without waiting to be dismissed. The council members sat in silence for a moment. Then Dreth waved a hand and said, file it with the others. And they moved on to the next item on the agenda. 3 days later, without any announcement or explanation, the ambassadors of 3 small GSC species quietly requested private meetings with Sarah Voss. She accepted all 3 appointments. She had already written their names in her notepad 2 weeks before they asked. The second full session of the Centennial Summit was supposed to be about trade. There were 17 items on the official agenda. The first 16 were routine. The 17th was not. Vasquez had been working on it for months. He had quietly gathered the votes he needed, speaking to delegates in corridors and private rooms, making small promises and calling in old favors. He was very good at this. He had been doing it for 40 years. By the morning of the second session, he had 31 commitments from the 47 member species. More than enough. The item was listed simply as Sol System Status Review. Most delegates did not know what it meant until Vasquez stood and began to speak. He spoke for 20 minutes. He used calm, reasonable language. He talked about the responsibilities of the GSC to maintain stability. He talked about the importance of proper governance for underdeveloped worlds. He talked about resources and efficiency and the burden of charity. He never said the word humans once, but everyone in the hall understood exactly what he was saying. The motion was simple. Strip the Earth of its observer status. Reclassify humanity as a dependent protectorate. Under GSC law, a dependent protectorate had no right to independent space travel. Its resources were available to council members with basic filing fees. Its people were not citizens of the galaxy. They were, in the coldest legal language, property of the council. Sarah Voss sat at her small table and listened to every word. Her face showed nothing. Her pen moved steadily across her notepad. She did not look up. She did not react. She did not signal anything to anyone. The vote was called. The result came back in less than 3 minutes. 33 in favor, 10 against, 4 abstentions. The Grand Speaker announced the result. Applause came from the Kethari section and from several others. Vosketh sat down and folded his hands with the satisfied look of someone who had just closed a very good deal. Then Sarah Voss stood up. It was such a quiet thing, her standing. She did not raise her hand or ask for the floor. She simply stood, and somehow the room noticed. Maybe it was because in 11 years, nobody had ever seen her stand up to speak. Maybe it was because she was so still when she rose that the stillness itself was a kind of signal. One by one, the conversations in the hall faded. The rustling stopped. The hall went quiet. She walked to the speaker's podium at the center of the floor. Her steps were slow and even. She placed a single sheet of paper on the surface of the podium, smoothed it with one hand, and looked up at the hall. "I am going to read something into the official record," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried perfectly. "I will not be long." She looked down at the paper. "On behalf of the people of Earth and the Sol Compact, I am submitting formal notice of humanity's withdrawal from the Galactic Sovereignty Council, effective immediately. This decision is final, and was made by unanimous vote of the Sol Compact Emergency Assembly 18 days ago." There was a stir across the hall. Whispers. Movement. She continued reading without pausing. "The Sol Compact has also voted unanimously to reclassify the Galactic Sovereignty Council as a hostile foreign governing body. Accordingly, all GSC assets, personnel, and vessels are hereby ordered to withdraw from within 500 light-years of the Sol system. This withdrawal must be completed within 30 standard days. After 30 days, any GSC presence within that zone will be treated according to Sol Compact rules of engagement." She looked up from the paper. The hall was completely silent now, not the polite silence of people waiting. The deep, cold silence of beings who had just understood something they had not expected to understand. "We have also prepared a detailed record," she said, "of every piece of GSC data, intelligence, and communications that has been shared with the Sol Compact over the past 80 years, through both official and unofficial channels. This record has been secured in 17 separate locations. If any action is taken against Earth or its citizens, this record will be made public to every independent world in the galaxy." She paused. "We thank the Council for 80 years of education." She folded the paper, put it in her jacket pocket, and walked back to her table. She sat down. She picked up her pen. She kept writing. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the hall broke open. Voices from every direction. Delegates talking over each other, turning to their neighbors, pulling out communication devices. The Grand Speaker was calling for order, but nobody was listening. Vasquez was on his feet, his face dark and tight, speaking rapidly to his aides. On Earth, at exactly the same moment Sarah Voss had begun speaking, every public screen on the planet had lit up. Not with a news broadcast, not with a government announcement, just a symbol. Old and plain and simple. The kind of symbol that had been carved into the walls of military shelters since the first days of the space age. Citizens in cities and towns and small villages stopped what they were doing and looked at it. They did not cheer, they did not panic. They nodded, in the quiet way of people who had been told something they already knew was coming. In the asteroid belt, in the shadow of a massive rock formation that had been placed there deliberately 30 years ago, lights came on. Hundreds of them, then thousands. The shipyards were open. Back in the council hall, Vasquez pulled himself together. His initial shock hardened back into the thing that had always served him well. He turned to his military aide and spoke 3 words. Send the fleet. The punitive force he ordered was 40 of the finest Cathari warships. They had never lost a campaign. They had broken 6 civilizations in the past 2 centuries. Vasquez did not expect this to be difficult. He expected it to be a message. He expected it to be fast. He expected Earth to see the fleet coming and begin sending very different transmissions. ETA to the Sol system, 18 days. He did not know that 18 days was exactly how long humanity had asked for. High Admiral Vraxis had commanded a Cathari fleet for 31 years. He had fought 11 campaigns. He had never lost a single engagement. He was the most decorated military officer in his species' modern history, and he was, by every reasonable measure, one of the most dangerous beings in the galaxy. He stood at the front window of his flagship, the Endless Dominion, and looked at the star field ahead. Somewhere at the end of this journey was Earth. A small, wet planet with a thin atmosphere, and a population that had, according to recent reports, roughly 9 billion people. He was bringing 40 warships, each one crewed by trained soldiers, with the finest weapons the Cathari manufacturing base could produce. He had been told to make it fast and make it visible. A public lesson. Something the rest of the galaxy would talk about for 100 years. He expected no resistance worth mentioning. On day 3 of the journey, his intelligence officer brought him a report. Long-range sensors had detected unusual energy readings near the outer edge of the Sol system. Vraxis looked at the data briefly and told the officer to monitor it. Energy readings near an inhabited system were not unusual. On day 9, the readings were stronger, more organized. His science officer said it looked like drive signatures, but they were a type he had not cataloged before. Vraxis told him to keep watching. On day 15, the readings resolved into shapes. His sensor crew worked for 6 straight hours, trying to classify what they were seeing. When the lead analyst finally came to the bridge, her face was very still, in the way that faces get when a person is trying not to show fear. Admiral, she said, we have 212 contacts. Vraxis turned slowly. Repeat that. 212 distinct vessel contacts. Formation depth of approximately 80,000 kilometers. They are holding position at the edge of the Sol system's heliosphere. She hesitated. They have been there since before we entered detection range. They were waiting, Admiral. Vraxis looked at the main display for a long time. Classification? That is the problem, sir. We cannot classify them. The hull configurations do not match anything in our records. The drive signatures are new. The power readings are... She stopped. Are what? Very large, sir. Vraxis had been a soldier his entire adult life. He knew what fear felt like in his body, and he knew how to push it down and think clearly anyway. He pushed it down now. Weapon signatures? None active. All 212 vessels are running cold. No targeting systems engaged. No weapon arrays powered up. She looked at her display again. They are just sitting there. That, Vraxis thought, was almost worse. A fleet that screams its power at you is trying to scare you away. A fleet that sits in silence and waits for you to come to it is not worried about scaring anyone. He ordered the advance to continue. His 40 ships moved forward. On the bridge, nobody spoke unless they had something necessary to say. The silence was thick. At 500,000 kilometers, the human fleet still had not moved, still had not powered any weapons, still had not hailed his ships. At 300,000 kilometers, Vraxis ordered a halt. He stared at the display. 212 ships, not one of them matching any known design, not one of them showing the slightest sign of stress. He sent a hail, standard GSC military format, identify yourself and stand down. No response. He sent another, declare your status and clear the approach corridor. Silence. At 200,000 kilometers something changed, not from the fleet, from Earth itself. A single transmission came through on an open channel, audio only, one voice, calm and flat and completely without urgency. Admiral, you have crossed the marker. Everything that happens now is your choice. He recognized the voice. He had reviewed her file. Sarah Voss, Ambassador. Age 53. 11 years of sitting quietly at the end of a table. Vraxis set his jaw and ordered a full advance. His 40 ships accelerated. They crossed 150,000 kilometers. 100,000. 80,000. The human fleet moved. Back at the council hall on the far side of the galaxy, a group of delegates had gathered around an emergency feed. A Myriad communications officer had managed to tap a live sensor relay from a monitoring buoy near the Sol system. The image quality was poor, and the data was 3 minutes delayed, but it was enough to see the shapes of the fleets on the display screen. Quell stood at the back of the group. He watched the screen. He did not speak. For 4 hours, the delegates watched. Some of them left and came back. Some of them could not move at all. The Cathari section was very quiet. Vasquez stood at the edge of the group with his arms at his sides, and watched the display with eyes that had lost the comfortable certainty they usually carried. The battle, if it could be called that, lasted 4 hours and 6 minutes. It was not the kind of battle they had expected to see. There were no long exchange of fire, no dramatic explosions, no burning hulks drifting in space. What they watched, with growing and terrible understanding, was something that looked less like a battle, and more like a very controlled, very cold, very efficient operation. The Cathari fleet signature did not disappear. It fragmented. Ship by ship, the signals went from active to dormant. Not destroyed, shut down, captured. When it was over, 37 of the 40 Cathari ships were still intact, and completely unable to move. The human fleet had not lost a single vessel. The monitoring feed showed 212 human ships sitting around 37 disabled Cathari warships like quiet giants that had grown tired of waiting and had finally simply reached out their hands. A new transmission came through on the open channel. The same voice, still perfectly calm. We are returning your ships. We kept the Admiral. He is well. You can have him back when you are ready to talk like adults. In the council hall, nobody laughed. The Galactic Sovereignty Council did not collapse all at once. It came apart the way old things come apart when the foundation shifts. Slowly at first, then quickly, then all at once over a single week, when everyone who had been holding on finally let go. The first to break were 3 of the smaller species who had abstained from the vote on the Dependent Protectorate resolution. Within 48 hours of the battle in the Sol system, all 3 sent bilateral communication requests directly to Earth, bypassing the GSC entirely. They did not ask for military alliance. They asked, carefully and with some obvious nervousness, whether Earth would be interested in discussing a new kind of relationship, a fairer one. Voss replied to all 3. She was still aboard the Constance. She wrote her replies by hand. The Cathari political structure moved faster toward collapse than anyone had expected. It turned out that a great deal of Cathari authority rested on the belief that their military was unconquerable. That belief had been the foundation of every agreement, every treaty, every political arrangement they had built over 3 centuries. When the 7th Fleet came back without its 40 ships and without its admiral, that foundation cracked down the center. 2 of the 3 largest Cathari political factions immediately began blaming each other. By the end of the month, Brevath had resigned his position and gone into private life, and the remaining Cathari delegates at the GSC were speaking in much quieter voices than before. Oev, who had been living quietly in his home and working on a private research